and welcome back to my corner. We're now on day 10 of making our sweater, and today we're going to be working on the button band, particularly the one that goes on this side of your sweater where the buttons will be sewn on. So not just yet with the buttonholes, that will be the other side. But yeah, I'm excited because we're getting super close to the end, only like a few more details, and you will have your Harry Styles cardigan. Like, that's so awesome! So I know, like, I'm super excited for you guys to finish. I'm ready to see everyone's completed sweaters. So yeah, let's get started. Alright, so here we have our almost completed sweater, and what we're working on today is the button band that corresponds to the yellow, black, green, and orange strip. So basically, the button band starts from here, so where you see that dip of your collar, it starts here and ends at the end of your red ribbing. And in the official pattern, J.W. Anderson says that you should be using chunky yarn. I personally didn't like using chunky yarn for the button band just because he tells you to use chunky yarn with technically the wrong size needles, so it turns out a little more stiff. And since this sweater is really soft, I wanted to keep that soft feel overall, which is why I used thinner yarn. I also did that in my original sweater as well. So this is the yarn I used, and of course, if you could hear that in the background, it's the corresponding size 7 needles. So it's size 4 yarn. This is the one that I used for my original sweater as well, and size 7 needles. But of course, that's only my suggestion. If you would like to use the chunky yarn, as he says in the original pattern with the size 7 needles that he says, you are more than welcome to. It's just a personal preference for myself. And of course, you can have your own. Okay, so now for the casting on of your stitches. So since the pattern obviously uses chunky yarn, that's why he says that the width of his button band is 6 stitches. As we know, if you are using thinner yarn, you need double the amount of stitches, so that would be 12. And here is what that looks like. What I like to do, just to make sure that what I have doesn't look too small or too big, is obviously measure it against my jacket. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but if you haven't noticed already, on the original jacket, this button band will actually be sewn on top of that first stitch. So what I like to do is obviously measure it and see and kind of make sure that my button band will be okay. And then also what I do, since I'm using 1-inch black buttons, is I kind of put it there to see, don't know if you can actually see that, to make sure that my button doesn't look too big or too small. So I'm using 12 stitches. If your sweater is smaller than mine and you see that this button band might be too big, you can always take off stitches, or if your sweater is bigger and you feel like, this button band might look too small, you can always add stitches. Totally up to you because this is your sweater. So yeah, so it's 12 stitches, and guess what? It's a garter stitch. The official pattern had some things that I wasn't entirely sure how to do, so I'm just going to keep it simple like I did with my original sweater, and what I did for my button band is entirely a garter stitch. So no problems there. We all know how to do our garter stitch. It's just a bunch of knit stitches to get our row. So when we pick up our yarn, it's literally just all knit stitches for the entire thing. And since this is a long piece, I know it's not as big as our panels or anything, but since it is a longer piece and with thinner yarn, it kind of takes a while to build up all that that whole panel or that whole strip that we're going to be using for our button band. If you do need to take a break, please do it. As always, we're kind to our bodies, we love ourselves, so we want to make sure that we're not hurting ourselves for any reason. And if you feel like your fingers are cramping up, or your wrists are feeling weird, or just if you don't feel normal by any reason because of what you've been doing for a while, because I know this can be strenuous on the hands, if you do not feel normal, please stop, take a break. Just make sure you know where you left off. Obviously this pattern's easier because it's just a bunch of knit stitches, so you can easily just pick it back up. But for whatever reason, please stop and take a break and come back later. That's totally okay. No one is judging here. So yeah, there's our first row, and obviously when we flip over our work, it's just gonna be the same thing all the way up until we have our completed button band. Okay, so I'm coming into my final row to go ahead and bind off, and I actually had to take away 2 stitches. I had started out with 12, and once I'd already done a little bit of the button band, I realized it was far too thick for mine, for my sweater, so I took off 2. So that's why I always think it's very important to measure things out, just so that we make sure that everything is properly sized for our sweater, because then I would have had an awkwardly thick band, and that's not what we want. And you will be casting off, or binding off, or taking, however you call it, taking our piece off the needle the same way that we've been doing. And here we have our button band piece. Here I have the piece laid out on the sweater, and as I mentioned before, the button band will be stitched on the outside of the sweater. And as you can see here, of course we're going to weave in this tail later, but as you can see here, the stitched button band is sewn on to the outside of your panel and goes from the dip of your collar to the end of your red ribbing. And in my next video, I will be showing you how and where to put your buttons so that we can get started on the other side, which will be the buttonholes.